Hello everyone, welcome to Biophilia's one-shot video on the chapter The Living World from class 11. Before starting this video, do like, share and subscribe our beautiful channel and do hit the bell icon so that you get notified for the upcoming videos. So let's start the chapter by understanding what is living. So to understand what is living, you need to look for some characteristics that are shown by the living organisms to help define what is living. So major characteristics होती है that are being shown by the living organisms. They are as growth, reproduction, metabolism, cellular organization and consciousness. So these are going to be our main headings that we have to see in detail for the part of this chapter. So let's start this one by one to see the details one by one. Now let's understand the first characteristic of living, that is growth. अब growth को अगर पढ़ना है तो first we should understand the twin characters of growth. Twin characters यानी दो होंगे, so these are as increase in mass and increase in number. अब जैसे ही growth हो रही है, you understand that there is going to be increase in number of cells. Now as the number of cells increases in the organism, वैसे ही increasing mass होगा, and since the mass and the number increase in going hand in hand, those are called as twin characters of growth. Now in the case of plants, you define growth with the adjectives as indefinite, open and a continuous type of growth. जबकि animals के case में you can say it as a definite and a closed growth. Closed growth है यानी after a certain period of time, the animals show less or no growth in certain areas, that is nothing but closed growth. अब plants हो गए, animals हो गए, let's understand about unicellular organisms. So unicellular organism एक ही cell है, so they are going to grow with the help of cell division. अब cell division में क्या होता है? The parent cell is going to divide its cellular content into two to form the daughter cells. अब ये बस division है of the material, that is why these organisms are called as immortal organisms. अब unicellular organism के केस में अगर growth देखा जाए, that is because of cell division, and reproduction also occurs because of cell division. So growth and reproduction की जो process है, that is going to be synonymous, that is they go with hand in hand together, that is they are synonymous. अब cellular growth अगर हम बोल रहे हैं तो what do you mean by cellular growth? You say that there is increase in protoplasm of the cell, then you say the cellular growth has taken place. Now this was all about the organisms and the short keynotes about what is the growth meaning for them. So now let's understand the types of growth. तो टाइप्स ऑफ ग्रोथ में दो आते हैं, दैट इज द एक्सट्रेंसिक ग्रोथ एंड द इंट्रेंसिक ग्रोथ. अब एक्सट्रेंसिक ग्रोथ जो होता है, दैट इज मेजरली सीन इन द नॉन लिविंग थिंग्स. अब नॉन लिविंग थिंग्स में ग्रोथ कैसी होगी? बिकॉज ऑफ डिपोजिशन ऑफ सर्टेन मटीरियल्स. फॉर एग्जाम्पल, अगर किसी बंद कमरे में बहुत दिनों से सफाई नहीं हुई हो, तो व्हाट इज गोइंग टू हैपन? देयर इज गोइंग टू बी अक्यूमुलेशन ऑफ डस्ट. And when the dust gets accumulated on the table, slightly increase in the height of the table can be observed. That is nothing but the extrinsic growth. Similar case snowfall होने की वजह से जब snow इकट्ठा हो जाता है on the mountains, again that is going to increase the height in the winters, whereas in summers snow पिघलने की वजह से the height is going to decrease. Now again in the extrinsic growth क्या होता है? There is increase and decrease, but in the intrinsic type of growth there is only increasing growth. That is living organisms में the growth is going to be internal because of cell processing. Cell process होता है, internally growth होगी and that would be a unidirectional growth, यानी एक बार बढ़ने पे you are never ever going to come back to your original size. अब लिविंग organisms तो grow हो सकते हैं, but we all know that dead organisms will never ever grow again. Because of that condition, you say that growth is not a defining property of living organism. इसका मीनिंग क्या हुआ कि अब सिर्फ growth को as a characteristic only, a single characteristic देख के you cannot define the living organisms. Now let's understand about the second characteristic, that is reproduction. So reproduction जहाँ पे हमने पहले पिछले स्लाइड में देखा था that unicellular organisms are going to have reproduction and growth as a synonymous feature. अब multicellular organisms की अगर बात हो रही है तो in that case reproduction is important because there is going to be production of progeny to show the parental features passing from the parental generation to the new offsprings. अब reproduction के दो types होते हैं. The first that is asexual reproduction and second that is sexual reproduction. Asexual reproduction में अगर points देखे जाए तो first that you have to remember that if the offsprings are going to be genetically similar. अब जेनेटिकली सिमिलर होने की क्या रीजन है बिकॉज देर इज ओनली वन सोर्स ऑफ डीएनए बिकॉज ऑफ अ सिंगल पेरेंट एक ही सोर्स है डीएनए का दैट इज द रीजन दे आर गोइंग टू बी जेनेटिकली सिमिलर अब फंगस अगर एग्जांपल है तो फंगस इज गोइंग टू रिप्रोड्यूस asexually by producing asexual spores whereas yeast and hydra are going to produce asexually by budding. प्लेनेरिया के केस में regeneration होगा and filamentous algae and fungi can reproduce by fragmentation. So again you might know that budding, regeneration and fragmentation is again the types of asexual reproduction. अब types of production में second आता है that is sexual reproduction. So sexual reproduction you have to remember that offsprings are going to be genetically dissimilar. Now why these are dissimilar? Because जो progeny बनेगी वहाँ पे fusion होगा of two different gametes and two different gametes that means majority of the time there is going to be two different sources. Now because of two different sources there is going to be mixing that is going to occur and form dissimilar offsprings. Now you need to understand that in some organisms there is no reproduction occurring. अब reproduction नहीं होता है ऐसे कौन से organisms है that is mule, hinny, sterile worker bees and infertile humans. Now these organisms cannot reproduce but you have studied in earlier classes that all these organisms are still living. But can you say that if they cannot reproduce वो अब living नहीं है? No, you cannot state it like that. And why you cannot state it? Because if they are showing exception in this particular characteristic, but still they are living organisms, and that is the reason why you call reproduction as a characteristic feature and not a defining feature. अगर defining feature होगा तो there will be no exceptions, whereas if it is a characteristic feature then exceptions can occur to define the living. अब यहाँ पे हमने देखा था about mule and hinny. So what is the difference between mule and hinny? So the first figure over here is of mule and the second figure is of hinny. And in the third figure you can see the sterile worker bees. अब mule जो होता है, the mule is going to be a result of a fusion from two different sources. That is, the male part is going to be coming from the donkey and the female is going to come from the horse. तो अगर मेल डोंकी और फीमेल हॉर्स का फर्टिलाइजेशन हो जाए then the mule is going to be formed, whereas the hinny is going to be the opposite cross. That is, if the male is a horse and the female is a donkey, then the resultant offspring is called as hinny. Now you know that horse and the donkey are going to be two different species, and whenever there is a cross between interspecies that is two different species are getting crossed to produce a offspring, then that particular offspring is going to be infertile. यानी mule और hinny they cannot reproduce. यानी अगर दो mule organisms को अगर fertilization के लिए अगर छोड़ा जाए तो they cannot produce offsprings. So new mules needs to be produced by the cross of male donkey and the female horse. And because of these exceptions, again should tell that reproduction is going to be only a characteristic feature and not a defining feature. Now let's understand the next characteristic, that is metabolism. Metabolism कौन कौन दिखाता है? All the plants, animals, fungi and microbes are going to exhibit metabolism. अब metabolism के reactions को study और demonstrate करने के लिए you can use the system that is going to be outside the body in a cell-free system. यानी since it is outside the body, there are no cells that are going to occur, और ऐसे cell-free systems को you call it in vitro conditions. So the metabolism जो होता है, there are going to be two processes involved. The first, that is catabolism, and second, that is anabolism. Catabolism क्या होता है? So to remember what is catabolism, you can remember the word cut. So C is cut and C is for catabolism. So when you are cutting things, what are you doing? You are breaking complex molecules into simpler molecules. उसका opposite क्या होगा? Anabolism, wherein you are making or synthesizing complex molecules by using the simpler substances. Now since this processes can be exhibited outside the living body, that is the reason you call it a characteristic feature. Characteristic feature जैसे हमने पिछले स्लाइड में देखा था, that whenever you state it is a characteristic feature, there might be some possibility of exception. तो ये केस में क्या exception होगा? That these metabolic processes can be processed outside the body, and since it can be processed outside the body, cell होना is not ज़रूरी. And because of that, you call metabolism as a characteristic feature of living forms. Now because of that, another criteria comes, that is cellular organization. यानी cells body में होना is going to be a defining feature of the life forms. यानी cellular organization जो होता है, a cell cannot be prepared in laboratories and in vitro conditions. And because of that, cellular organization is going to be called a defining feature, and उसका कोई exception नहीं है. It can be used as to define life forms. Let's discuss about consciousness. Consciousness is going to be a most obvious and technically complicated feature that is going to be possessed by all living organisms. और ये consciousness की वजह से they can sense their surroundings, and because of the sense that is due to stimulus, they can respond to their surroundings. Now how can they respond? Plants के case में they can respond to the stimulus that are achieved by light, water, temperature, gravity, pollutants and even other organisms that are surrounding the plants. अब photo period कैसे reproduction को affect करता है? In the case of seasonal breeders that can be present in plants as well as in animals. Now a very important statement that comes over here, that is all organisms handle chemicals entering their bodies. Now question comes to you as giving this statement to you, and they may ask that whether this statement can be fit into consciousness. Yes, it can be, because consciousness की वजह से ही the cell is going to determine whether the chemical that is surrounding the cell needs to enter inside the cell or it needs to remain outside the cell, and that purely happens because of consciousness present in the cells. And as you know, cells make up the organism, so organisms are going to handle the chemicals entering in and out their bodies. अब ह्यूमन बींग्स की अगर बात की जाए तो ह्यूमन बींग्स में स्पेशल फीचर होता है दैट इज प्रेजेंस ऑफ सेल्फ कॉन्शियसनेस. अब सेल्फ कॉन्शियसनेस जो है दैट इज गोइंग टू बी ओनली इन द केस ऑफ ह्यूमन बींग्स. सो ह्यूमन बींग्स हैव अ स्पेशल प्रॉपर्टी ऑफ प्रेजेंस ऑफ सेल्फ कॉन्शियसनेस, जबकि बाकी सब ऑर्गेनिजम्स में होगा सिर्फ कॉन्शियसनेस. Now consciousness, because it is present in all organisms without any exception, you call it as a defining property. But अगर क्वेश्चन ऐसा पूछा जाए कि सेल्फ कॉन्शियसनेस डिफाइनिंग प्रॉपर्टी है या नहीं, then you would answer that self consciousness is not a defining property because it is present only in human beings and rest of the organisms do not have self consciousness. अब यहाँ पे एक बहुत important statement है. The statement I would like to read it for you. That is, properties of cellular organelles are not present in the molecular constituents of the organelle, but arise as a result of interactions among the molecular components comprising the organelle. अब इसका क्या मीनिंग होता है शॉर्ट में? That is, whatever the molecules are present inside the organelle, they are going to be interacting together, and because of the interaction there is going to be a formation of new function. Interaction की वजह से जो function होता है that is going to be seen inside the organelle. But if these constituents are removed and isolated, तो क्या होगा? Isolation में there is going to be no function as that is seen in the organelle. So that is what is meant by this statement. Now finally, when we have studied all the 5 major points of characteristics of living, so you can define the living organisms as self-replicating, evolving, self-regulating interactive systems capable of responding to external stimuli, that is nothing but living organisms. Now let's understand about the diversity in living organisms. अब diversity की बात है यानी there is going to be a lot many types of organisms. So these organisms, that is the number of species, is going to be a huge range, that is 1.7 to 1.8 million different types of species that humans have known and described. And rest of the organisms may be present on this planet Earth that are still not known or have not been described by human beings. But known or described की range कितनी है? 1.7 to 1.8 million. Now when you are understanding the external and the internal structure, the structure of cell and the developmental processes, all this when you understand together, that is going to come under the process of characterization. जबकि अगर when you are identifying, that is whenever the process is going to be for describing the organism, तो फिर डिस्क्रिप्शन की बात आए दैट इज गोइंग टू बी बिफोर द नेमिंग प्रोसीजर. Before naming, you are going to describe how that organism looks. Then that process is going to be called as identification. अगर किसी का नाम आप भूल जाते हो तो what do you do first? First you are going to identify some characteristics, that is how the external or how the internal nature of that person was. So that is going to be the characteristics that you are going to remember in your mind. So that was the first process, that is characterization, wherein you remember some unique features regarding that organism. Second process में अगर आपको नाम नहीं पता है तो what do? You are going to express out that characteristics and describe the organism. And when you are describing the organism, you are going to help to identify that organism. And because of this, that is going to be an extensive laboratory and field studies. क्योंकि आप अगर किसी एक पर्टिकुलर चीज का डिस्क्रिप्शन दे रहे हो, तो इन द होल दिस diverse organisms study, you need to find out the perfect match for that description before the naming procedure, and because of that it is going to be an intensive work. अब finally जब आपको पता चल गया है that you have identified the organism, in that case you are going to group all the organisms together based on similarities and dissimilarities, and that would be called as classification. Now, once you have classified the organisms in the third step, then you are going to identify and give a standardized name, and this standardized name is going to be accepted all over the world by giving a scientific name. Scientific name जैसे ही मिल जाता है, that procedure is called as nomenclature. That is your fourth step. So first step क्या होता है? Characterization, wherein you are going to study about the external and the internal structures. In the second step, that is identification, you need to remember that it is going to occur before the naming procedure. Naming procedure के पहले जो होगा, that is identification. थर्ड स्टेप दैट वाज क्लासिफिकेशन, उसका बेसिस होता है सिमिलैरिटीज एंड डिससिमिलैरिटीज. एंड द लास्ट स्टेप दैट इज नॉमेनक्लेचर, इन दैट यू आर गोइंग टू हैव अ साइंटिफिक नेम गिवन टू दैट organism. Now here are some important full forms and their abbreviations that you need to remember for this chapter. So यहाँ पे 6 है, कौन से है? Let's see. First is ICBN, that means International Code for Botanical Nomenclature. This is going to be helpful for the nomenclature, यानी scientific names का जो procedure है वो सारा under this body is it going to come. Next is ICZN, that is International Code for Zoological Nomenclature, that is related to animal nomenclature, and ICPN is related to plant nomenclature. Then ICVN, that is International Code for Viral Nomenclature, is going to be responsible for the naming procedure of viruses. Then next is ICNCP, that is International Code for Nomenclature of Cultivated Plants. Yani all the farming related crops are going to be named under this code, that is ICNCP. Next is ICNB, that is International Code for Nomenclature of Bacteria. So as the name, it is going to be useful for bacterial nomenclature. And last, that is ICNP, that is International Code for Nomenclature of Prokaryotes. So again, the prokaryotes are going to be the source for naming. Now let's understand about the scientific names. So every organism that has been categorized, that has been identified and classified, then that organism is going to get a name that is called as a scientific name. Now what is the need to give each and every organism a scientific name? Reasons are 5 that have been listed down. The first one is organize and classify. So because of the scientific name, each and every organism can be easily categorized, and because of this categorization, you can easily understand the characteristics of the specific organism, and then you can organize each and everything to identify the organism as per the name. Second need है, that is clarity and precision. So what is happening that a country like India, wherein there are many local languages, then what could happen? A single organism may have many local names, and because of the local common names, you cannot identify or remember each and every name of the language. And because to avoid confusion that is created by the common local names, you give it a single all worldwide name, that is a scientific name. यानी अगर scientific name all over the world despite of the language differences, that organism would be known as by its scientific name. थर्ड आता है यूनिवर्सल रिकग्निशन. That means these scientific names that has been provided to each and every organism, these are going to be standardized and they are going to be accepted universally. That is, these are not going to change from place to place and language to language. They are going to be same all over the world. Fourth is stability. Stability, that means even if you are shifting from one genera to next genera, then also the names are going to be retained and that would be specific for that particular species. Last point, for the need of scientific naming, that is interspecific relationship. Now, because of the criteria that they have been using for scientific naming, because of those names, you can understand the similarities and the differences between the species because of the relations that can be established because of the scientific names. अब ये रिलेशनशिप कैसे बिल्ड होती है? बिकॉज ऑफ द स्पेसिफिक टाइप दैट दे यूज टू नेम द ऑर्गेनिज्म. Now let's understand about a term that is binomial nomenclature. Binomial nomenclature जो है that was first introduced by Carolus Linnaeus. Carolus Linnaeus का पूरा नाम था Carolus von Linnaeus. Now why did he change or shorten his name to Carolus Linnaeus is a story by his work. That is, Carolus Linnaeus was the person who started giving names to organisms using two words. अब दो वर्ड्स, जैसे वो हर ऑर्गेनिज्म को दो वर्ड्स से नाम दे रहा था, and because of that reason even he changed his name from 3-word to a 2-word name, that is Carolus Linnaeus. So that was a little story behind his name converting to Carolus Linnaeus. Now let's understand what this technique is. So the technique of giving two-word name is called as binomial nomenclature. So as we know that Carolus started giving two words name. So the first word was called as the generic name and the second word was called as the specific epithet. Now, what was the rules that he had kept in his mind to give the names, that is to nomenclate each and every organism? So there are some universal rules that each and everyone has to follow when a new organism has to be given name or whenever you are using that already given scientific name. So यहाँ पे 4 rules है. So you have to remember these 4 rules whenever you are using the binomial nomenclature scientific names. So the first one is going to be biological names given to the species are going to be a Latin origin word, and that Latin origin word is going to be written in italics. And because of italics, you can identify that this word is going to be a Latinized version. Second rule होता है कि जो first word होता है that is going to indicate the genus, whereas the second word is going to define the specific epithet. Now this is going to be universal for each and every binomial scientific name. थर्ड रूल होता है कि अगर आप कोई भी साइंटिफिक नेम इफ इट इज हैंड रिटन देन दैट नीड्स टू बी underlined separately, and if you are printing those scientific names then these need to be in italics, that is they need to be in a slanted font. फोर्थ रूल है that is the first letter of the first word. फर्स्ट वर्ड कौन सा था? First word was the genus name. So genus name का first letter should always be written in capitals, and then the first letter of the species epithet needs to be written in a small letter. So to understand this last point, let's see the example. Example में क्या है? This word is going to be your genus name, and this is going to be your species epithet. So this is your specific epithet, the second word. तो यहाँ पे हमने क्या देखा था? First letter of the first word needs to be capital. So you can see Mangifera indica is going to have the first letter to be capitalized, and second word ka first letter is going to be in small characters. Now here you can see a word that is LINN. Now this LINN is going to represent that this name was actually given by Carolus Linnaeus. So that is the reason after the name you write LINN dot, that represents that this name was provided by Linnaeus. Now let's understand another topic, that is taxonomy. Taxonomy is going to be a branch of science wherein there is going to be naming, describing, classifying of organisms, and these organisms may include होते हैं all the plants, animals, and even the microorganisms. These all organisms can undergo the process of naming, describing, and classification that comes under taxonomy. Another word that you may come across, that is systematics. Systematics is going to be derived from a Latin word that is called from systema, that means systematic arrangement of organisms. So now you might have get an idea about what is systematics. That is, whenever you are going to arrange the organisms in a systematic manner, then that branch of science would be called as systematics. Now, this systematic is going to take account of evolutionary relationships, and based on the evolution, they are going to be systematically arranged. Now here are some very important points that may come as direct MCQs, that is some important books and their authors. This is a general knowledge base. If you remember those, you can get through the question, otherwise you may get stuck and then go with the wrong answer. So avoiding wrong answers, let's understand some important books and their authors. So first book is Species Planetarium, that was written by Linnaeus. Second book was Systema Naturae, again that was written by Linnaeus. And the third book you should know, that is Genera Plantarum, written by Bentham and Huckel. Now again, as the important books and their authors, there are some fathers of the fields that you need to remember. That is, father of botany is going to be Theophrastus, father of zoology is called by Aristotle, and father of taxonomy is going to be Linnaeus. Now let's understand the taxonomic categories. Taxonomic categories क्या होते हैं? The process of characterizing all the organisms is going to be based on a taxonomic arrangement, and this taxonomic arrangement is called as taxonomic category. So all the categories are going to constitute together to form the taxonomic hierarchy. So each scientific name given to the category is going to be called as taxa, and the taxon is going to be the unit of group of taxonomy. So all this thing you can understand in this figure below, that each and every colored box is going to be representing a single taxon, and this single taxon is going to combine and form the taxonomic category, and this taxonomic categories combine and give you taxonomic hierarchy. So kingdom say phylum, phylum say class, class to order, then family, genus and species. This decreasing order is going to be nothing but taxonomic hierarchy. Now what you need to understand in these, that is the similarities between the characters are going to increase when you are going down this hierarchy, and the number of organisms are going to increase when you are going above in the hierarchy. Now let's understand each and every taxon one by one. So the lowest taxon that you have, that is species. So we would be starting, let's see in the diagram. So we would be starting by the lowest of the hierarchy, that is species, and from species we would be building our knowledge up till the kingdom. So let's start with the species first. तो species क्या होती है? Species are nothing but group of living organisms that are going to be consisting of similar individuals that are capable of exchanging genes and interbreeding. इंटरब्रीडिंग करने का मतलब है to produce fertile offsprings. If the living organisms can produce fertile offsprings, then they are going to be grouped together to form the species. Now these species is going to be a principal and a natural taxonomic unit that is going to be ranked below the genus level. Now species के क्या examples हो सकते हैं? They can be as Leo, Tigris, Pardus, Tuberosum, Melanogenum and Sapiens. Now above species there is the next taxon, that is genus. Now the genus is nothing but whenever the species are going to be grouped together, then that would be called as a genus. So grouping of related species with more characteristics in common, then that would be forming a genus. So example can be Panthera, Homo, Felis, Canis, Solanum. All these are examples of genus. Next taxon that comes, that is family. So again a group of related genera is going to be grouped under family, and this grouping is going to be based majorly on vegetative and reproductive features when you are categorizing the plant species. तो प्लांट जेनेरा को ग्रुप करने का एक बेसिस यूज हो सकता है, दैट इज वेजिटेटिव एंड रिप्रोडक्टिव फीचर्स. So examples of family can be Solanaceae, Felidae, Canidae. So here you can identify that Felidae is going to be the cat family, that is going to include the all cats, the lion, tiger, the leopard. All these are going to group under the cat family Felidae, whereas the Canidae family is going to be the dog family, that is going to include dogs, wolves, fox, all those coming under Canidae. Next taxon above family, that is order. So whenever there is a grouping of families with a few similar characters, then that would be called as a order. So example of orders is Polymonaceae, Carnivora and Primata. Moving on with the next taxon, that is class. This class is going to be made up of different related orders. Example can be Animalia. Class combining together is going to form the phylum, and the phylum is going to be called as division if you are speaking about plant classes. तो plant classes को जब group करेंगे तो instead of phylum we would call it division. So phylum के example हो सकते हैं Chordata and Angiospermi. So Chordata is going to be a phylum in the case of animals, and phylum, that is division, in the case of plants is going to be angiospermy. The last and the most larger taxon is going to be the kingdom. The kingdom is going to have all the various phyla that are going to be coming in the highest category, that is kingdom. Kingdom के 5 examples हैं, that is Animalia, Plantae, Fungi, Monera and Protista. So in this table above, the white table, that is table number 1, you can identify the standardized suffix that can be used to identify the kingdom, division, class, order, family, genus and species examples. With these standardized suffix, you can understand whether the given example belongs to class, family or other category. Similarly, this pink table down below here is again a very important table that you need to remember, because most of the times question can come that to identify what is the family of housefly. तो अगर family of housefly पूछी जाए तो then you need to identify that the family of housefly is going to be Mucidae. Similarly, the order of housefly, that is going to be Diptera. Similarly, you need to remember this entire table if they ask you direct question based on the names and their categories. Moving on with the last major topic of this chapter, that is taxonomic aids. Taxonomic aids क्या होते हैं? Whenever you are going to study anything regarding taxonomy, in that case you need to collect some actual specimens that can be related to plants or related to animals. And because of these collections and you store it somewhere, these are called as taxonomic aids. So the first aid that you need to study here, that is herbarium. So herbarium is going to be a storehouse, and in this storehouse you are going to store the collected plant specimens, and these plant specimens are going to be dried, preserved and pressed onto the sheets. जैसे ही प्रेस हो गए, they are going to stain the paper and they will be used as the source of reference for the taxonomic studies. So in the figure 1 down here, you can see how the plant sources are going to be dried, pressed and preserved onto the paper, and that would be stored inside the herbarium. Now this stored sheets are going to be the quick source of reference. Because of that, herbarium की एक characteristic line पूछी जाती है, that is the quick source of reference is nothing but herbarium. Now, all the information about the local flora, that is local uh, plants and flowers, uski information you can get it inside the herbarium. Now, each and every herbarium के पास sheets होती है where you are going to preserve the plant specimens, and that sheet that you are going to preserve, that needs to have a specific size. So size is mentioned over here. In this size you are going to store the herbarium sheets. Now to understand what the specimen wants to tell you, there is going to be a label of information, and information label में क्या क्या put होता है? You can get the data regarding the date and the place of collection, who collected the specimen, that is the collector's name. You can get the English, local and the scientific name of the plant species that has been preserved onto the sheet, and even you can get the family of that particular specimen. Now this was regarding how they actually help you to understand the taxonomic studies. But herbarium sheets to preserve करने हैं, how do they preserve it? There are different steps that include collection of the specimen, then drying the sample, then poisoning it so that you can delete or you can kill all the microbes that are not needed onto the specimen that are going to damage it. So you're going to poison it to remove all the unwanted stuff. Then you're going to mount it, that is you're going to secure it onto the sheet. Then for extra security you will stitch it to the paper, and then you will label to identify it later again, and then you will deposit it, that is you are going to stack it in this type of racks, and in these racks you are going to store all the collected samples. Finally, where can you find these herbarium? Herbariums की बात तो बहुत हो गई, but where can these herbarium be found? So there are locations having herbarium. The first is going to be the Royal Botanical Garden and is present in Kew, England. And second herbarium that can be found is in Central National Herbarium, that is in Calcutta. Now let's understand the next taxonomic aid, that is botanical gardens. Botanical gardens का एक खासियत है, that is it is going to collect the living plants for reference. Herbarium की केस में dried preserved plant specimens थे, but in botanical gardens you can have the living plants for reference. Now each and every plant that is needed inside the botanical garden is going to be grown, and this grown plants can be used for identification purposes with the help of a label that would be having its scientific name and the family mentioned onto the label. A botanical gardens के कुछ examples है that you can find those type of living plants, that is in Indian Botanical Garden present in Howrah, India. Second है National Botanical Research Institute situated at Lucknow, India. And the third is Royal Botanical Garden present in Kew, England. Third taxonomic aid है that is museum. म्यूजियम के केस में जो कलेक्शन होगा दैट इज बिकॉज ऑफ द प्रिजर्व्ड प्लांट्स एंड एनिमल स्पेसिमेंट्स. बोटानिकल गार्डन्स में सिर्फ प्लांट्स थे, हर्बेरियम में भी सिर्फ प्लांट्स थे, बट इन म्यूजियम्स यू वुड हैव बोथ प्लांट्स एंड एनिमल्स. Now these preserved plants and animal specimens can either be stored in containers or they can be as dried specimens, या फिर stuffed animals के form में, या फिर skeletal remains can also be preserved in the museum. एक example of museum है that is National Museum of Natural History situated in Delhi, India. This is an example of museum wherein you can find all the types of stuffed animals, skeletons and another types of preserved plants and animals. Fourth taxonomic aid है that is zoological parks. Now zoological parks में क्या होगा? All the wild animals, the living wild animals are going to be in a protected environment under the human eye. यानी ह्यूमन के केयर के साथ these wild animals would be protected so that they do not undergo extinction, or if they are undergoing endangered they can be artificially breeded and they can be increased in their number to sustain their survival on this planet. So zoological park का एक example है that is National Zoological Park, again present in Delhi, India, wherein you can find the wild animals in the protected environment. Let's move on with the fifth taxonomic aid, that is key. Key is going to be used for identification of plants and animals that are going to be based on the characteristics that are contrasting, and these contrasting characters are in a pair called as couplet. अब couplet के हर पेयर में से एक स्टेटमेंट को अगर उठाया जाए तो that would be called as a lead. Now, a very important feature of key is that it is analytical in nature. That is, you are actually investigating to find out the identification of the particular specimen. So, how can you actually understand this? Is by this adjacent figure. So this is an example how you can investigate to come to your final result. For example, अगर आपके सामने कोई specimen दिया हुआ है, तो you start asking questions regarding it. For example, is it a purple leaf? If you have the answer yes, then you would get an answer कि ये जो leaf hai that is coming from a particular plant. If you get the answer no, then you would have again options opening up, then keep giving the answer, then finally you would reach a conclusive result. ऐसे procedure करते जाओ, that is yes or no, that is contrasting characters, then you would lead to the identification of that specimen. The sixth taxonomic aid is going to be flora. Flora क्या होता है? That is going to give you an actual account of the habitat and distribution of the plants. Particular area में कौन से plant कौन से particular zone में है या how they are distributed, all that information is going to be provided in the flora. Now that is also going to provide you the index of the plant species, and सारे species के नाम and number is going to be provided inside the flora. The seventh aid is going to be manuals. Manuals, as you know, they are going to provide information for identification of the names. सिर्फ नाम identify करने के help आएगा the manuals. The eighth is going to be the monographs. Mono का meaning होता है one, so you are going to have the information regarding any one taxon only. एक ही taxon के बारे में information होगी in the monographs. And the last taxonomic aid is going to be catalog. This catalog is going to have a special feature, that is alphabetical arrangement of the species in a particular place. एक region में कौन से species है, उन सबका alphabetical arrangement will be available inside the catalog. Now this brings us to the end of all the taxonomic aids mentioned in this chapter, and that also brings us to the end of the chapter. Before completing this video, this will be your handwritten chapter summary to see the whole chapter in just one go. I hope this helps and you get motivated to make these kind of summaries on one glance for all the chapters. Till then, you try to make like these summaries for your better understanding. We will meet back in one more amazing chapter. Till then, you have to like, share and subscribe, and do hit the bell icon for the next chapters coming. Thank you.